day of our event called Conference of the Movements, com26b.com. And today we're in the Women's Empowerment Conference. And today we have some amazing women that's helping protect our children and our women and those people from human trafficking. So this segment is about human trafficking and how we can prevent it. And today we have some special guests with us. The first guest that's coming on with us is Sylvia Matayoshi, and she's been in the 25 years in the human trafficking to prevent it and to stop it. And she can talk a little bit about her background, and the other guests will come on with us. Sylvia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, David. Sylvia Uilani Matayoshi, originally from the great state of Hawaii, and happy to be here today and grateful to be able to talk about human trafficking, especially ways to end it. People are usually pretty informed around trafficking, but they don't often realize the extent that it happens, the ways it happens, and that it's definitely relevant here in developing countries, that it's not a third world issue, that it's something that we need to make sure that our communities are well informed about and understanding as well the dangers around trafficking, especially as it relates to our children.
Thank you so much. And we also have with us Sherry Lewis. Sherry.
Hi.
She's one of the 3 peacemakers with us.
Hi, David. I don't know where you guys started the introduction. We were jumping on with you here. So yes, I'm so happy to be with all of you here today. And I see Linda. Linda's popped on. And Marty Ray's over there. So that's good. Marty Ray, I think you're muted right now. So
yes, I am.
Yes, and we have Sylvia here with us as well. And I'm really just going to do a brief introduction. Marty Ray, this is the first time I'm seeing you by face, but Linda holds a very special place in my heart. And Sylvia, this is the first time I'm meeting you by face, but I'm just in awe of the work that is so needed that you all have been on the ground doing right now in regards to human trafficking, and particularly even with our Indigenous population. Myself, my mom is Marianne Flores, Lippinup-Apache, Kolatikikan, Scott Irish. My father is Clarence Henry Lewis Jr. He's Welsh. I myself, saw a lot of the impact that our people on my mom's side, our culture, went through the assimilation process, through the boarding schools, through the trauma. And this is an extension that is still affecting our people as a whole in such a huge way, which is the human trafficking. So anyway, I just feel very honored to sit here with you all. And really, I want to introduce you ladies to speak on what you've been seeing on the ground, with the actions that you've been taking, the solutions, and how people can get involved to help support you in a really good way, and continue on this work that you all have been doing. So, but I was going to introduce Linda. I was going to introduce you first, if you would introduce yourself, and then I was going to have Marty Ray introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rose Linda Looking. Everybody calls me Linda. I'm a Assiniboine Sioux from the Fort Peck Indian Reservation. My father is Edward Shields, and my mother is Rosalyn Shields. My great-grandfather on my dad's side is Andrew Shields, and my great-grandmother is Florence Shields. And on my mom's side is Jeanette Scout, and my grandfather is Charlie Jones. And I work for Mother Nation as an elder liaison, but I've also been involved in the community for a long time with climate change and as a water protector. I've also worked in the alcohol and drug field for 30 years. So that's basically who I am. I case manage a house of natives, a recovery house. So I'm a case manager here too in Seattle. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Good morning, Nechmaitski. My name is Marty Ray Ramsey. I'm a member of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, which our reservation is located in Central Oregon, but my people derive from the Columbia River, which is the border between Washington State and Oregon. And I am a proud mother and a proud sister and a proud survivor and a proud helper, supporter of our Indigenous families, especially Indigenous women. I hold a special place in my heart for sexual exploitation and ending gender-based violence, as well as promoting and pushing the MMIW movement. And it is my sincere belief that direct service advocacy is MMIW prevention. So I want to thank Linda for inviting me here today to partake in this space with you. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sylvia, did Sylvia introduce herself yet?
She introduced herself a little bit. I think she can be the first speaker to talk about creating a blueprint to stop human trafficking, because that's what we're here today, to create a global blueprint for that and to have the resources and everything else to prevent that and to look at the roots of the problem. Sylvia, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Thank you, David. And I wanted to say that I'm really honored to share the space with Linda and Marty Ray, as well as Sherry. Thank you for that. And one of the things I wanted to talk about that was a priority in this message today is the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. When we talk about ending domestic violence, addressing gender-based violence, and wanting to look at the magnitude of the issue to be able to deconstruct it and end it, it's important to realize that there are a number of marginalized communities that are receiving very little attention and support around this issue. And so, as Marty Ray eloquently said, as we're addressing this issue and providing direct services and advocacy, that is activism. It is a way to provide prevention and intervention at the most important grassroots level. The great thing about the remarks that you're going to hear today is that we all work within the trenches, that we all are direct to these issues and to our sisters, and all come from Indigenous communities. And so I wanted to talk briefly about that and then turn the time over to my sisters, but also to recognize that it's important to recognize where the gaps in our services are. While there are services to, for example, MMIW cases, they're very rarely recognized, and there's so much work to be done in this arena. One of the ways to end it is to fill in the gaps and be proactive. And part of that being proactive is to recognize that this issue of trafficking happens all over in our communities. I had a boss once that in a meeting said you could throw a dart at the map, even our local maps, and guarantee that there's specifically, we are working on child trafficking, that it's happening in every community and not just in Indigenous communities. Although my experience has been that the issues of exploitation in Indigenous communities are much more hidden and difficult to prosecute, and difficult because of some of the prosecutorial issues involved. And so I want to mention that. And talking about a blueprint for ending human trafficking, I want to make sure that we are including survivors in this work. Survivors, while we have these great platforms to speak from and are grateful to do so, survivors are truly the best experts at addressing human trafficking and talking about what needs to happen and how intervention is most effectively addressed. And so I want to encourage us to remember that, to include survivors in our work and in these conversations and in these platforms, because they truly are the best experts at what needs to happen to be able to be effective in ending this most heinous crime and threat to our self-determination and our sovereignty as Indigenous people. Another point that I wanted to make is to the use of technology. For so often as an operative, we've been working, my background is in law enforcement and also advocacy, and oftentimes our work is really frontline to this work, and being able to do operations has been an important part of the work to combat it from the outside, being able to infiltrate and go in, but really to essentially deconstruct and smash these rings and these organized criminal entities. It has to happen from within. And the best, most effective way to do that now is through the use of technology. A current project that I'm working with, and we'll link a bio to this that includes a website if you'd like to know more information about this project, is being done out of Australia, work that I'm collaborating with a company called Miss Pierce International. And it's using technology to be able to address this issue and to fill in the gaps, as well as be steps ahead of the traffickers. And finally, I just want to mention how important it is to use the use of elders in this work. And I'm so grateful to know that that's happening, and we have that addressed as part of our comments today, to make sure that there's elders involved in this work, that they are so revered and important to the process of engaging our communities, to having these open discussions in very oftentimes sensitive subject matter that are difficult to not only talk about for some people, but also for others to hear. And one of the ways to mitigate that is to involve our elders. They're so important in this process to include in these conversations and also to take with us in this work. One of the projects I'm also working on is with a foundation called Grandmother Circle the Earth, where when we go to intervene in MMIW cases, that there's always a grandmother present to be able to give a warm hug, essentially a blanket, and conversation of comfort and support to the families impacted and the actual victims as they're rescued. And to remember that that connection is so important, to have them involved frontline in the work along with survivors.
Beautiful, Sylvia. Thank you so much for your work and everything that you've just laid out before us, just really taking it in. And I actually believe I spoke with Susan, who's a part of your grandmother circle. I'm actually a grandma. My grandbaby's still 3 though. But I did speak to Susan, I believe, that's a part of that circle. So very good to hear that. And Marty Ray, you had mentioned that you are actually a survivor yourself. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Mm-hmm.
So from everything that you just heard, what Sylvia shared, what is your perspective, and how are, and if you want to share some of the things that you guys are already doing on the ground, that would be great.
Absolutely. So just building off of what Sylvia has shared, it's really exciting to hear the progress and to hear in different parts of the lands, that this movement is moving forward. I agree fully and wholeheartedly that it is a grassroots effort that's going to make the most impact and the most difference. We are amongst our community, we are amongst our people. If we're not living in our personal communities, we're more than likely connected to other Indigenous communities. And so it's my personal belief that even though I'm not in my homelands, I'm here in the Puget Sound area, that I serve our relatives here, believing that somebody's going to be sent to my homelands to serve them as well. I really want to start with going off of what Sylvia said. Most current data that I've heard fairly recently is that when we lose our girls, especially to trafficking, our children to trafficking, they average around the age of 12 to 15. And as a direct service mobile advocate, what that means, I really am proud that I believe that this is the most effective way to serve right down in the trenches on the streets. And it's because it changes the dynamic of accessibility. And the reason it changes the dynamic is because what we know historically is that our people do not have the comfort to go to law enforcement or to go to agencies to seek out help. More times than not, most people who are on my caseload will never ever approach law enforcement. And so then it's how do we heal and how do we move forward in a good way when justice is never served or justice doesn't find us, you know. And the truth is that when you look at the statistics of the judicial system, the court system and the judicial system is not created to serve our people. It's not created for us to come out in an advantageous way, you know, and I've noticed that even in my work right here on the day-to-day, even when a client goes step by step, does what's suggested, follows all of the procedures, still could come out and not have no resolve in the systems and the programs that are established today. So the one thing that Mother Nation does provide that is, I believe, is exclusivity and it's very unique, is it is a client-based, client-led, cultural-based program. It's here in the Seattle area, but we serve all of the Indigenous communities throughout Washington State and the Pacific Northwest. So our vision, even though we're physically located here, our vision is for the region, for the area, and especially amongst this I-5 corridor, where we know is a huge hub for human trafficking. The other part of that, when the judicial system is not served, is what we tend to know is that the number one consumer in human trafficking is often men, especially white men, and the probability of them either being arrested and or convicted in any type of judicial system, whether it's tribal, federal, county, state, you know, on up, is highly unlikely. And so because that money source, that's the consumer that's feeding this ugly monster per se at the hands of our children and at the hands of our relatives, it's really hard to see how a person can move forward in a good way and get that access to healing and to be reminded that they're born sacred, that they were created by creator, and that they're not just here on happenstance. And even in spite of these horrible things that they've experienced, they still are very sacred. And so that's the way that I view my role in this work, is that I'm merely a connector and a reminder. I support and suggest options that the client might consider, you know, to move forward. And it's definitely a holistic approach. And the one thing that is really great, just like Sylvia had mentioned, is the spectrum of the work and all of the team that's involved, from elders on down, from our founders to, you know, to our partners. There's definitely a holistic view of elders to middle age, younger age, you know. The client base that we serve not only are adult individuals, but their children, you know. And so when you think about human trafficking and MMIW, like I said, we lose our relatives around the age of 12 and 15. Well, a lot of times, if they're blessed to survive that experience, when they resurface is commonly in their mid-late 20s to their early 30s. But when we see them, they don't come back, obviously, the way that they left, right? When we see them unsheltered out in the streets. We may see them cloaked in mental health and addictive type, you know, challenges and adversity. There's many different facets, you know, that they don't come back appearing the way that they left if they're fortunate to even resurface. And so when we have the opportunity to intervene with mobile advocacy, our advocates are literally out in the streets. You know, we travel to the different reservations in the area, and it's not only giving the option of those basic necessities, whether it's rehousing, safety planning, you know, those types of things. It's also, number one, first and foremost, is giving a connection to the creator. You know, in our lobby, there's a smudge bowl, there's the sacred medicine, there's that atmosphere already the foundation of what our relatives do. They have that history of their indigenous, you know, roots or not. And so prayer is always first and foremost in all of our gatherings, whether it's us as a staff or it's us on you know, representing in other places as a broader view. And so that really makes a difference, and that's incorporated not only amongst our team, but with our clients. And even though there's many different representations of different nations in this area, we still have that common core connection, and especially to the land and to our creator. And so it does make a difference when we have the opportunity to approach our relatives in that way. I really like what Sylvia shared in regards to technology. I have a lot of ideas in regards to how technology could be moved forward in a good way that could serve all of our Indigenous nations. And my personal perspective, even more recently, is we hear a lot of concerns about law enforcement and MMIW database, and the cases and how they're misclassified or how they're not accounted for, right? So this is out to the universe, out to the Facebook land, whoever. I'm speaking out to my Indigenous relatives that are in computer science or that have the capability to create database. Because if us service providers, direct service providers, had a way to track as well, it would be a compare contrast against law enforcement. And perhaps it would be our resources and our network that would identify, because what we know is as survivors of any type of gender-based trauma is more times than likely we experience multi-trauma abuses, right? And we also know that when a survivor experiences domestic violence, sexual assault, or human trafficking, more likely than not, they are 7 to 8 times likely to return, if not to that same person, then to establish another relationship that's equally or more detrimental than the one that they exited from. And so when I think about technology and the way that our survivors are tracked, like I'll give you an example. Let's say Jenny Red Fox, I'll just make up a name, right? She comes into my office and she's a survivor of domestic violence. So I serve her, go through the whole process with her. And if I have this database available, and there's other partner agencies here, like the Cowlitz Tribe has a health authority that's located here in the city, Seattle Indian Health Board. So if as direct service providers, we have a way of compiling that data to just further perpetuate whether it's compared and contrast to law enforcement or not, I believe if we have the opportunity to have those advances in our favor, that we have access to, the net changes the whole dynamic. And not only that, as Indigenous people, we all know that we come from different nations.
Oh,
that we are.
Oh, there she is.
Oh, am I cutting out?
No, you're here now for a second.
Okay.
But I hear you. Yes, please continue. And I can't wait to touch on what you said, because I found somebody who's working on an app just like you're describing. So Marty Ray, please continue what you were saying, though. We lost you for a second.
So basically, as direct service providers, if we had a way to track those demographics, we would have a more accurate account of our survivors and where they come from, what nations they come from. And that would be a way for tribal communities to connect, because a lot of times, especially Seattle as a relocation city, there are many different nations are represented here, the Indigenous community that's here. So something like that. And there's a local organization called Seattle Against Slavery, and they have some very great technological advances in regards to being very proactive in this work. But I really like that idea of us taking it into our hands, because what I share when I'm sharing not only with survivors or have an opportunity to present to fellow coworkers, whether they're Indigenous or not, is that nobody is coming to help. We are the help that we're waiting for. We are the ones that are going to be the most effective, like Sylvia shared. We can relate more directly and can bear witness to the adversity and challenges that come forth. Another spectrum that I like to include and is further developing, but has recently launched here with Mother Nation, is I teach a DV group called Ungroomed. And basically what that's based off of, we have a group of 10 women, and right now it's been converted to a virtual platform on Zoom. And it's what I've heard, I would say at least 95 to 97% of my caseload has come back and said, what's wrong with me? Why do I keep going back to this situation? You know, or they'll get out of that situation and enter into another relationship. But a lot of times what survivors don't realize, because this trauma is introduced as a child, you know, the number one increase that we see is familial trafficking. And so it's happening in the family unit. Parents are trading their children or trading their relatives, you know, for durable goods or for sex or for drugs or whatever, right? So that's definitely been an increase. And when we look at familial trafficking, when that trauma is introduced at a very young age, what a lot of times survivors don't realize is that predators have a very clear and concise grooming technique. There are 6, 7 different steps, you know, and that's a way that they use as power and control to maintain that abusive situation. And so when survivors come into this space, what they're introduced to is those steps of the predatory grooming process. And it's no different than if a child is child sexual abuse, child sexual assault, incest, you know, or whether it's rape, whether it's, you know, somebody you know, you don't know in the community. It could be somebody in your sweat lodge family or in your longhouse. You know, these are very real. It's not just the outside boogeyman who's non-native, and, you know, it's our own people too, for many different reasons. And so because of that, what unanimously the participants that attended this group were all just astonished, because they had not realized, you know, that predators have a very clear grooming technique. And also, as survivors, a common reaction or response is to be self-inflicted. What did I do? Why did this happen? I must have caused this, because that's what a predator does, right? He conditions the victim to believe this is their fault, or, you know, that they maintain the power and control. And so what I believe is that a number one way that we can change the course of these types of gender-based violence against not only our relatives, but any relatives, is that we raise an ungroomed generation. And if our girls are leaving at the age of 12 and 15, they're being taken, or they're being, you know, coerced off into this life, or however they get into this human trafficking experience, then that means that we have to engage. And, you know, you don't hear a whole lot nowadays of people coming from a prevention standpoint, where so much react and respond, right? Because we can't fulfill the demand, right? The need is so great, and the numbers just keep increasing. And especially since COVID has started, like, it's not only a demand in the need for our services, but the intensity of the situations are just crazy, you know, off the chart. And so as raising an ungroomed generation is to have that awareness and that information available to our young girls, to our young boys. You know, the best statistics I've heard in this region is that 1 in 2 girls and 1 in 5 boys experience child sexual abuse, child sexual assault, or incest in their home. So that means at a very young age, they've already been introduced, been prematurely stimulated, you know. And we come from the dynamics. I'm 47, almost 48. When I think about my elder Linda, right? Her generation comes from a much more modest, you know, we don't talk about sexuality. We don't talk about, you know, relationships and intimacy and violence and stuff. And I remember my grandmother was not very open about things like that. And neither was my mother, for many different reasons, historically and current day. And so to be able to empower our children, you know, to not only know, you know, of all these different vulnerabilities around them, but for them to know about themselves. You know, one thing I really pride myself on as a mother is my 14-year-old daughter. She can go into the doctor and she can explain and name body parts and know what they do and why they're significant, and whether, you know, if they're a part of her reproductive system, or so on and so forth. And she can clearly and concisely, you know, relay that. And a lot of times, a lot of her peers don't have that basic information. So how do we come from a place, like we're talking about, a blueprint and empowerment of our women? That's one way, is that we have to start much younger, and we have to be open and honest, you know, because the reality is the rest of the world that's happening around us, it's everything goes. You know, people are buck wild doing all kinds of stuff and things that you never thought you would see before. It's open and socially acceptable. We see it all over media, all over, you know, the computer, all over TV, you know, so there's those barriers and that is very, very diluted compared to the ancestral, you know, raising that I'm familiar with, that we are raised in. And so to have an opportunity to connect with our young relatives before they get to that point, you know, and I think it's just another point or when you see teen violence, you know, one way that our girls are coerced, especially in the trafficking at the age of 12 and 15, it's no longer this pimp, it's a boyfriend who comes in the name of, oh, I want to have a relationship with you, and then exploits the person, right? And the next thing you know, they're down in Vegas and they're, you know, in a full-fledged prostitution life, you know, and so when you think about 12 to 15, that just blows me away as a mother of a 14-year-old Indigenous daughter, you know, and she's biracial, her father is Black, you know, and their community and other communities of color experience this equally, if not greater. And so those are just my personal ways that I've participated and then doing this work here in the Seattle area. And what we basically do is it's word of mouth a lot of times. We haven't done a whole lot of networking because the demand is so great. And then when the community starts talking, then of course, you know, they get our information. We go to the people. Pre-COVID, I was, you know, riding around out in my truck and out in the streets and have gotten different leads from many different, you know, sources. But if that means returning a relative to their home reservation or their homelands, you know, and providing transportation, if that means inviting them in to participate in a talking circle, or if they want to, you know, have prayer, or if they want to go to Linda's recovery group, we have other, you know, it's just a holistic approach of the healing journey when surviving trafficking like this. And the only other thing I think that I would love to put out there, and I know this is very far-fetched, but this is where I believe the great ideas start from. They all start from somewhere. So when we think about these human trafficking rings, you know, I would love to see, if not our men, our women, whomever, our veterans especially, be pivotal in this opportunity, like a war party, right? We used to send our relatives out and they'd go to war. They're prepared to fight for our people, you know. And you think about the training that a lot of our veterans have received as they, you know, served in the military and stuff, and those tactical type things. And if not even for self-defense, for survivors or just people in general, but to be a part of that core group that goes out and dismantles these rings. Because the reality is, when you look on the national level, you know, you think about names like Jeffrey Epstein, you know, and our current leadership, and they're all affiliated to this same type of, you know, adversity that we're fighting against. So it almost feels like an impossible fight, right? But every time that we have the opportunity to interrupt these types of violences and to move on behalf of our relatives, I think it makes a world of difference. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
I could go on. Give me a nice.
Marty Ray, that was so well. And you know, you hit on Sylvia's bullet points that she was going through that blueprint, and I agree with everything that you said. And it's interesting because your feedback for that type of app that you're talking about through technology, I look forward to connecting with somebody who was just speaking in that regards. And then also going back to what you were saying, even about how this starts in our own communities. And of course, you know, comes from a lot of the trauma that has been circulated. So that the grassroots that you're doing is so powerful. And then I see that elders and youth coming together in such a beautiful way, like Linda and having a facility even in the future that supports your organization that you already have started, where you can actually, I know you're finding housing, but where we can actually have an area to literally bring our elders and youths together to have the trauma restoration process happening, even with the ones that have been, they have to have their own place, the ones that have been invoking the violence and partaking in it, as as well. And so that has been laid very, very heavy on my heart, in a form of wellness centers and having our therapy with our animals too. And so much to touch on with that, and support of that. And please say your organization again and the website, if you don't mind, so people can donate and help support your organization right now. What is your website and where people can donate?
Okay, so our organization is called Mother Nation. We're
Mhm.
we have an office in South Seattle, and we're also expanding to Snohomish County, which is just north of Seattle. Our website is mothernation.org. That's all lowercase, Mother Nation, MOTHERNATION.org. Phone number 206-722-2321. And I'm glad that you spoke on what you said in regards to these healing centers, because our founder and executive director, Noreen Hill, that's exactly her vision. So to be in an atmosphere where we're all talking about similar things, I think those visions are coming together in alignment, for the betterment of our communities. That's exactly what her vision is. Yes.
Collective vision, and in these types of wellness communities across our nation, and bringing over 1,000 Indigenous nations together globally, too, as with the healing of our Mother Earth, and protecting our cultures, our seedings, our healing, our trauma, but having housings for our victims of human trafficking, also our veterans and foster kids. And there you have the veterans to support right there in that ambition towards these rescue missions, which I think we definitely need that. So all the points that you made are so there. So thank you, and very much in line, and thank you for that. And I wanted to mention, when we have such strong areas, that you went through so many levels of how human trafficking actually takes place. And there's so many different ways that it happens, and sexual trafficking happens. And I really appreciate that. And then there's other things that are really outside the box. Like you said, there are a lot of wealthy white males that are involved with the trafficking. Our Indigenous women are also looked at as a rarity because of, our population, and exotic, almost like in that sense as well. And then you have the different levels for sex trafficking. And then you have the trafficking for organs, which is huge too, that happens from the waiting list. And believe it or not, there's still ritualistic, dark reasons for human trafficking that people do as well. So you have these three major sections, and all of them have extensive categories on how it partakes. So I just have I can't wait to speak with you all more and collaborate, and come in behind with those wellness centers, behind what you all are already doing, and just honored to be here, this collective vision. And sorry, David, didn't want to cut you off, but I wanted to introduce Linda, and hear her story and her viewpoints on everything.
Right after Linda's viewpoint, Sylvia has the different categories that's more expansive than that, and she can go into the different categories so people could understand the level of what people don't understand, what's human trafficking, and so without understanding all the different categories.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you for all that information. I know through my own experience as a, is it working? Okay. My own experience as a recovering alcoholic and being an alcoholic out there on the streets and doing what I, drinking. I come from an alcoholic home, and I have sexual abuse in my background, domestic violence in my life, and understanding that, I mean, there's been a few times that I could have been sex trafficked. I pulled the gun on a few guys that I caught a ride with. I used to hitchhike, and I was very drunk, and that's one of the issues. And so that's why I started as a counselor, an alcohol and drug counselor. And while working in treatment and approaching and having a lot of women in the treatment center I worked at was in Portland, and I made it my responsibility to take everyone that was from the reservations, because I grew up on the reservations, and I understand the alcoholism and the devastation that happens and the poverty in those things that kind of attract us as young people, that we want to get out of that. We want to, and we make the wrong choices and end up in these places as MMIW or a sex traffic, because 15% of human sex trafficking survivors disclose that substance abuse was induced. If they aren't using, they will induce them with drugs, and they will get them that way, so that they will do what they want them to do. And so I just more understand that I'm on the side of trying to educate people, because there's a lot of shame and a lot of remorse and a lot of I shouldn't have been drunk, I shouldn't have been high, when that's not an excuse, but that's the first thing we think when we get sober and clean, and we look at all those issues that happen to us if we're lucky enough to be alive through all of that. And so where I work at with Mother Nation, we do have elders there. The program started with elder advisory board, and I'm one of the elders. I do the recovery group, and then we have an elder that facilitates the sexual abuse group, and we have an elder that facilitates the healing group, Talking Circle, and then we got Marty Ray who does the DV, and she's also under another elder, Alma. So our goal as elders is to train and to help these young people and train them to with the knowledge that we know, because I have someone that helps me in my group that is one of our staff that's younger, because elders have a special touch.
Mhm.
And our women are seeking out that. A lot of our women didn't have mother role models, or father role models. They didn't have that. And there's always a reason why we're picked out of a whole group of women and taken advantage of that way, because they can see it in us. And so I'm really glad that Marty Ray started that group called Ungroomed, and to start educate and what to look for. I see there's progress in the areas here, in our areas. Only the casinos have been getting education around sex trafficking that's happening in the casinos here. We have a lot of casinos in this area all along I-5, and there's a lot of sex trafficking that happens, and I just I know I supported many MMIW families that had lost members in Portland. You know, I spent 3 years with a lot of the family members that lost, and it was very devastating, you know, that lost family members and that are still missing. And it's hard, you know, we find to find the comfort. I support them constantly, you know, and tell them I keep them in my prayers of families, because I just can't imagine being that person left behind, worrying and wondering where my son is or my daughter is at, you know. And the police do not give support. The police are part of the problem too. You know, I remember on our res there were some police that were taking advantage of their power to pick up young girls. You know, I managed to get out of a couple of scrapes out of those. You know, so their intention is immoral. You know, their intention is to hurt these young girls. They hurt them before they take them to the jail. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done on our reservations with the tribes. You know, a lot of it begins in the home with the drinking. So doing preventive measures and teaching our young girls. All my girls are older now, but at one time they wanted to party at home on my res. We went home for a visit and they wanted to celebrate one of my girls' birthday. And I told them, I said, I'll tell you something. I said, you know, I never allowed them to drink in my home, but I told them they can have a party at the house. I said, because you might get too drunk and something can happen to you. It doesn't matter if they're cousins or you just can't trust them. And so I let them drink at home, you know, because I know that happened to me. That was the beginning of some of the things. I'm really grateful that, you know, that I'm able to those. I really believe that Creator put me through all of that so I can be here working with you ladies and you young men, you know, because we experience things and Creator has a place for us to be. And this is where I'm supposed to be because of my experience out there on the streets and my experience recovering from that. So thank you. I just want to let you know I support all of you and your ideas. It's going forward, and I'm excited about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. And thank you just for your whole existence. You're amazing. So thank you for everything, and so much love and blessings to you. And it's so good to see you. I can't wait to see you by face soon. Well, we're by face now, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Really see you. And thank you so much. And yes, Sylvia, please take it from there, from everything you've been listening to, and just your viewpoints and what you had to add. Love to hear from you.
Thank you. I just wanted to tie it all in and talk about the domestic trafficking and as it relates to Indigenous communities. You know, one of the things that we all have in common on this call today is that we are all working in the same region and have worked in the same region for a long time. And human trafficking is very complicated. It's one thing we didn't mention yet is that it is the #1 industry in our world economy, surpassing drugs and arms, weapons. And so essentially people are more valuable than guns and drugs. Since 9/11, our law enforcement systems have become so sophisticated in communicating cross borders transnationally that they're able to monitor the movement of weapons, the illegal trade of arms. And so that's become less lucrative, less, it's too much of a risk for a lot of organized criminal syndicates. Although trafficking can happen within individuals, and meaning traffickers sometimes can be individuals trafficking people they know, or kind of low-level pimps or people essentially trafficking their families out, as mentioned. A lot of times these cases happen through organized crime. It is a huge enterprise. It's a big multi-billion-dollar a year industry in our world economy. And so the top three industries in our world economy have been for decades. Drugs was the first one for many years, and then arms, weapons, and people. And nowadays it's the number one industry in our world economy, surpassing all of these other two industries I've mentioned. And it's broken down into a couple of categories, but just keep in mind within those categories, as we've mentioned, there are subcategories that can further break down. And the first one is labor, sex, organ harvesting. People ask all the time, does that really happen? And it absolutely does. We know that for a fact. Illegal adoptions. And, you know, in the Seattle region, for example, one of the things that really we see often is that, you know, Seattle is a region with international airways and waterways. We have a main interstate that connects the entire West Coast and then down to Mexico. And so we see a number of forms of trafficking. And oftentimes, and my sisters may recognize this and identify with this also, but when we work with survivors, they may talk about having worked, for example, in the fall, they may have talked about working in summer and fall in Eastern Washington in the agricultural fields, harvesting produce, and then in the winter working in restaurants and in the Seattle area, tied to the traffickers and their affiliates. And then at night being required to service different men and through sex trafficking. And so they are reporting having been trafficked in numerous ways, not just simply in labor or sex work in other forms. And so the person becomes the commodity essentially. And so when we talk about our sovereignty, this is absolutely, in my opinion, the most heinous crime. I mean, there are heinous crimes out there, but this is the most heinous crime, where a person is essentially the commodity, and they are bought and sold and traded and moved around multiple ways, multiple times. And essentially, if they are rendered unable to produce however they're required by their traffickers and not seen as very valuable in those industries, they are finally killed for their essential organs because that becomes more valuable. So when it comes to intervening, these cases are so important. And I want to say, as part of this talk, Ambassador Cam asked me to issue a global call to action. And what I want to say in that is to encourage our listeners to, you know, some of this conversation I know is difficult for people to hear, especially if you have not had a lot of exposure to this conversation. But what I want to say is everyone has a role in combating human trafficking. Everyone in our communities, everyone can do something. Take this information and share it with people you know. Find local organizations close to you, and you can do that in a number of ways. Googling your area, finding what trafficking organizations are doing great work in your area. There are a number of ways to support, handing out brochures, talking about it in your civic groups, your schools, training your children, talking to them, getting this information out. This information, a lot of times you can access it free through the website, through the Homeland Security's Blue Campaign. There's a number of great resources available. So there's this important issue of supply and demand. There is great work being done locally, as well as on a national and international level, with Indigenous communities responding. I've been fortunate enough to be part of a special operations team coming out of my work in law enforcement and recognizing the need for an Indigenous response team. There's a team out of Honolulu right now, Hawaii, that are working an all Indigenous response team that I'm a part of. And if you'd like to know more information about that or support it, please do. The website is www.clmhawaii.org, Children's Lives Matter, Hawaii.org. And it is run by a Native Hawaiian and a veteran whose daughter was trafficked, and that's how their family went on this journey of seeking answers. And so there are all Indigenous response teams right now being formed throughout the world that are very effective and doing this work and supporting the issues around MMIW. I want to encourage you to think about the issue of trafficking. One of our campaigns a couple years ago was called Look Beneath the Surface, our national campaigns through HHS. And it really is to help people recognize that trafficking can happen so subtly just all around, and to be aware of what the signs look like and know what to do. So David was going to include the human trafficking hotline on this, our page. And also you can go to my website, sylviamatayoshi.com, and find that information as well, as well as the connection to the tech company I talked about, which is continuing to seek funding to further the work in addressing most effectively through technology, the use of technology to combat human trafficking as well, if you'd like to support that. I'd like to give one example of something that occurred many years ago, but it just really brings home makes the point of the complexity of this issue and the relevance of it. I was doing facilitating at a domestic violence conference in Duluth, Minnesota, with a number of federal Department of Justice grantees who were from tribes throughout the United States, rural grantees. And because we were doing a lot of work in part of the governor's task force that year in Washington State, and I was running a human trafficking response team in collaboration with what is now API Chaya. I was the manager of that team, and Refugee Women's Alliance, the King County Sheriff's Department, Seattle Police Vice Unit, and the FBI and ICE. We were asked to do a breakout session on trafficking along with our regular class we were teaching on rural domestic violence. And we were in the Duluth Conference Center, which was this beautiful conference center. We were in a large training conference room, and behind us was a floor to glass ceiling of just pure glass that looked out onto the vast waters of Lake Superior. And while I was talking, there were several women, again, these are all tribal advocates from around the US that were at this conference. There were several women that were sitting together, and one of them began to cry, and she was clearly upset. I try to be so careful when training and speaking and mindful of our audience. And I stopped the class, and I just wanted to be sure I didn't insult her. I was concerned that I had said something to upset her. And I just asked if she wanted to say anything. There was a quiet room next to us that there were people there that had sage, and there was an elder there that was providing counsel and support, because oftentimes in these trainings it can bring up things, and oftentimes this work attracts the work of great survivors, and so it can be triggering, which is totally understandable. And so we had this quiet room, and she didn't want to go to the quiet room. She said, no, you're fine, you didn't upset me. She said, we have been having this problem on our reservation. She was from a local neighboring reservation 1 hour from Minnesota, Duluth, where we were. And she said, she was a tribal advocate, sexual assault and domestic violence advocate. She said, we've been having this for a couple of years on our reservation. We've never heard it framed and termed around human trafficking. We didn't know the terms human trafficking. We didn't know the term modern day slavery till right now. She said, we were calling it rape rings. And she said, here's what we have happening. We have local traffickers who are connected to these merchant marines on these ships on Lake Superior, who are going to our reservations and working with basically tribal members and community members who are brokering children and women and taking them down to the docks. And so here behind us is this, floor to ceiling wall that overlooks Lake Superior. And we look out and we see a Thai ship, a German ship, a Swiss ship, and they're these, huge cargo ships, right? And they're all coming into port and doing trade right there on these docks. And we're looking out and seeing them. And she said they come into docking, and they communicate with these traffickers and community members who are trafficking them, and they take them down to the docks at night and they trade them. There's money exchanged. And I said, what happens to these women and children? She said, most of them don't return. But the ones that do return are barely able to speak about the level of atrocities, of victimization of what's happened to them. But what they do report is that they're bought and sold and traded within these ports of calls by these merchant ships. And they know that if they try to run away or make a fuss of any kind, that they're going to be hurt physically, if not killed. And the ones that don't make it back, that are killed, whether they become sick or problematic in the eyes of their traffickers, they're just thrown overboard. And the frigid waters are, they sink, and they're never able to recover a body. And so they just simply disappear. And it was just hard to wrap our minds around that. And it was so, we wanted, women just became so intent. Several of them said, let's just go rush the ships that were on the port right then at that point, and wanted to go into the ships and confront the merchant marines and see if there were any women and children on board. But they talked about being bought and sold and traded multiple times, and that they were there for the so-called comfort of the men that were on the fishing boats. And oftentimes my experience is that, especially working with Pacific Island countries where there's a large fishing industry, is that many of them are being trafficked as well. They're not paid what they're promised. Their papers are taken. And so there's levels of trafficking. This is becoming more and more complicated, but I wanted you to know that this is absolutely a local issue that involves the trade of our women and children.
Thank you so much, Sylvia, for sharing everything that you did and your insight. And that's true. And then some of them end up in dungeons, and even in areas that, yes. So you hit on so many of those points, and there is so many layers to it. And I'm just so honored to be sitting with you all here, because I can't, it's like I look forward to the collaboration. It's tragic that we have to collaborate on a strategy against this type of evil and atrocity that's happening. And then even within our own people that are a part of it, as well, that's a whole nother level of trauma. But at the same time, how Linda was speaking earlier, how she feels, this is her path has come to a point of being able to serve in the capacity that she is now, with helping in the way that she is. That's what I'm feeling as I'm sitting here with you ladies, and also you, David, not to forget about you over there. So yes, but I just look forward to collaborating and continuing to chip away at this issue, which is huge. And I didn't even realize until you said that that's the number one economic commodity.
Industry.
Yeah, industry. Yeah,
It's a literal industry.
Literally an industry. So
add on to that a little bit?
Yes, please.
So the one thing that I gleaned from what Sylvia just shared, and that's not surprising at all, that human trafficking has surpassed, it's a convenience, because when you think about you're selling drugs or you're selling arms, you have to re-up, you have to go replenish that supply, right? Whereas you can sell a human person for many different reasons multiple times. So it's not only convenience, it's accessibility, right? The other thing that I wanted to make sure and make a point of, and this is actually a case that we experienced here with Mother Nation. So we had a client or a mother of a client who got a call that her daughter was being exploited in the Las Vegas area. So she had an opportunity, a small window of opportunity, to intervene and go retrieve her daughter. She found a way of escape from the person that she was with, and she brought her back up here to the area. So throughout a 4-year period, this young lady who was in her mid-20s had accumulated an insane criminal background, all of which was directly accumulated while she was being trafficked. Number one, she didn't know that she was being trafficked, because once again, it started from a boyfriend, somebody, an intimate partner, right? And then he turned her out and had her, doing sex trade for their living, for her hotel and stuff, and to feed them. And so her mother successfully retrieved her and brought her back home. Well, she started her healing journey, and part of it was she wanted to be reunited with her minor. And in order to do that, the father and his family, of course, had their standard of, requirements for her to be able to re-engage with the children. And so part of that was cleaning up her criminal history. So her mother called me and said, I'm going to take her up to the probation office, and let her turn herself in, and we'll just see what happens, because she's going to have to do this sooner or later. So when she brought her home, she entered her into a detox program because she was severely addicted to heroin and other drugs. Got her clean, she got stabilized, she was ready to turn herself into law enforcement. The mother called me right before she went. And I said, wait a minute, just hold on a second. Let's talk about this, okay? So I left here from Seattle, drove down to Olympia, and I met them before they went to the probation office. So we had the discussion, and she told me, the charges and what she believed she was looking at. And we all walked into that probation office together. And what we sat down, and luckily we were connected to a probation officer who was open and willing to listen. And when I described as an advocate what this client had experienced over the last 4 years and this accumulation of this criminal history, she explained to me that had I not come in there, the young lady was looking at 10 years straight time.
Wow.
Full. And then when I was able to explain, all of these charges were accumulated while she was being trafficked. That young lady walked out of there. She spent 2 days in county jail so they could process her. They immediately released her. They dropped all of the charges and they put her on 2 years supervised probation. And that was the first time, that was close to a year ago. It brought my awareness of how many of our relatives are in the prison, the penal system, in the judicial system, that are serving sentences that was accumulated while they were being trafficked. Trafficking is being forced, fraud, or coercion, right? That's the definition. And we have a partner agency in Olympia. Jerry Muma is the executive director of Innovations Human Trafficking Collaborative. And she is the one that one of them that Linda's talking about, that does the education of the casinos, And so had we not had this opportunity, to interrupt this process and actually talk about it before we went forward, she would have walked in there and done 10 years straight time, for something that she had no idea, number one, that she was being trafficked and that all of this could have played together. Now she's actually continuing on her healing journey. She's being trained to be an advocate, and she's a frontline responder, she just escaped it. And so the other thing that I love about Mother Nation that I believe is very unique as well, is that our incorporation of our clients that turn to mentees. Because the reality is without the reproduction and the promotion of advocacy, strong, Indigenous advocacy, this field is not made for longevity because of vicarious trauma, because of the multi-traumas, not only as survivors, but as what we're dealing with our clients. It's not really made for longevity. So how do we continue to perpetuate, and inspire our other relatives to do this work in a good way, and where does the difference? Everybody has a part, like Sylvia said, and that's so true. So with Mother Nation, a lot of our people, there's people that have been our client, and then they come in the capacity of a mentee. And like Rose, she works with mentees, our different staff, And so then, because the thing is the challenge is for any type of gender-based violence, but especially human trafficking, one of the challenges is, where is that better life? Because when you go and you get a job or you want to go function in regular day-to-day society, and they say, well, oh, there's these gaps in here, what happened, or, oh, we see you have this huge criminal history, so where is that better life once you've escaped that? Escaping it is only one facet of the issue, and how to be introduced to that healing opportunity and connectivity back to wholeness. And so as mentees participate here, and they incorporate with the team, they're part of our team. and some of them move forward and actually accept employment opportunities. But how do we bring that full circle? Because it can't be just getting our relatives out of that situation. There has to be something better. And one of the components and enticements that is very common for trafficking survivors that I've witnessed is that one way that they are coerced is with like a name brand, expensive, fashionable type things. So one special thing that we do that is instead of just going to basic, providers for different type of supplies, our needs, our belongings, our clothing, sometimes we do go, have private funding where we can go to a specialty shop and, they can get things that they like, and because those are some things that are really core important, those were ways that they were enticed. And when you think about the whole power and control dynamic, and what is when you the basic necessity of shelter, clothing, and healthcare and things like that, those are not afforded to most people who experience trafficking. So when I think about how those different opportunities can help as a holistic approach, to bring our relatives back home. And when they do come back home, where do they fit? Do we make room for them? Because the world says, oh no, you've been exploited, you're dirty, all these men have slept with you, or we paint the ugly picture, but where's their place when they do come back home? And as us who are working the front line, or us as community who are believing and have hope, for this to turn around, what type of space do we make for our relatives that come back home?
I think you're starting it right now by even what we're talking about. This is all re-education. So people that are listening to you, that are listening to Linda, that are listening to Sylvia, that are listening to this broadcast right now, this is a part of it, because people do have to be re-educated, and you are walking it. And I think a lot of the points that were made here today are the start of that blueprint, and continuing and helping to support the work that you all are already doing, because you really are there at that foundation and that core, and making such a difference in the way that you are operating right now. And so I think, bringing the healing centers together, like we're discussing and talking about, to have that real core support system of healing, and just continuing from there with the re-education and the outreach, and trying to, through that re-education, bring more people to responsibility, as Sylvia was saying. Yes, and we're all saying that responsibility, everybody can become a part of, and that just comes to really re-educating and getting the message out. And there are different names for these circles, as Sylvia also brought up earlier. So thank you so much, Marty Ray. And we're going to be in contact, obviously, and I'm looking forward to that. And Linda, did you want to say anything, closing us out, and also maybe, if you don't mind, leading us in a prayer, if that's okay, if you feel comfortable with that? I think you're on mute. There you go.
Okay, I just want to thank all of you for your motivation and your heart, to do this work, and to help our young girls and young men, to have a better future for them. And so we're on the right track, as long as people are, even one person can make a major change, and there's 5 of us here. So, we can go out and tell someone, and that other person's going to make a change. We build education and awareness by sitting down and talking to people that we meet. And so I just want you to know that you're all sacred. You're all resilient, and that's how our spirit runs. And so I'm just going to sing a song to end it for you. And it's a prayer song. So it's asking our Creator to help us. Oh. Wakatanka Ushimalayo O Magiayo O Magiayo Heo Dakuwanka Ushimalayo O Magiayo O Magiayo Heo Wakantanka Ushimalayo O Magiayo O Magiayo Heo Dakuwanka Ushimalayo O Magiayo O Magiayo Heo Wakantanka Ushimalayo O Magiayo O Magiayo Heo Dakuwanka Ushimalayo O Magiayo O Magiayo Heo Wakantanka Ushimalayo O Magiayo O Magiayo Heo Dakuwanka Ushimalayo O Magiayo O Magiayo Heo. Oh, thank
Oh,
you for the opportunity and honor to be here today.
thank you so much for the prayer, for the song. Thank you, all of you. Thank you so much once again, Linda, for the prayer and the song leading us out today. And let's just continue to collaborate. Thank you all tremendously. Blessings to you all.
Thank you.
Bless-
Thank you very much.
Blessings from the three Peacemakers, David Cam, Sherry Lewis, and Mesfin Zaid. Mesfin could not be here due to family issues. Thank you so much, and please stay tuned. And we'll put more information on our website about how we can help for human trafficking. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.